Vincent Cole had seen wealth before, but never like this. The Ashford estate stretched across 40 acres of manicured gardens, marble fountains and hedges trimmed into shapes that seemed to mock nature itself. As he walked up the stone pathway toward the mansion, his worn leather shoes felt out of place against the polished granite. He was a detective who specialized in cold cases, the kind most people had given up on, the kind that haunted families in the dark hours before dawn. Evelyn Ashford had called him 3 weeks ago, her voice trembling through the phone line, begging him to find her stepson. Adrian Ashford had been missing for 10 years. The family had held a funeral 7 years ago. They had mourned, they had moved on, they had divided his inheritance. But Evelyn never believed he was dead. She couldn't explain why, she just knew. Mothers know, she had told Vincent. Even stepmothers. The butler who answered the door was a thin man with silver hair and eyes that revealed nothing. He led Vincent through corridors lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, each one seeming to judge him as he passed. The house smelled of old money and older secrets, that peculiar scent of leather-bound books and furniture polish that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Evelyn waited for him in what she called the small sitting room, though it was larger than Vincent's entire apartment. She was in her late 50s, elegant in a way that came from decades of practice rather than natural ease. Her hands shook slightly as she poured tea into china cups so delicate Vincent was afraid to touch them. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of sleepless nights. "I know what people think. I know they believe I'm a foolish woman clinging to false hope. But I've tried everything. The police closed the case years ago. Private investigators took my money and gave me nothing. You're my last chance." Vincent studied her face, looking for signs of delusion or desperation that might cloud judgment, but all he saw was a fierce certainty that burned behind her tired eyes. "Tell me about the day Adrian disappeared," he said, pulling out his notebook. Evelyn's hands tightened around her teacup. It was October 15th, 10 years ago. Adrian had been acting strange for weeks, paranoid. He kept saying he'd discovered something terrible, something that would destroy the family. My husband Charles thought he was having a breakdown. Adrian had always been sensitive, artistic, not cut out for the banking business Charles wanted to force him into. That morning, Adrian came to breakfast with a folder full of documents. He said he needed to talk to his father privately. They went into Charles's study. I heard shouting, things breaking. Then silence. When Charles came out 2 hours later, he was pale. He said Adrian had left, said he needed time to think. That was the last time anyone saw him. Vincent leaned forward. "What was in the documents?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Charles burned them that same night. I watched him do it in the fireplace, watched him stand there until every page was ash. When I asked him what Adrian had found, he told me to never speak of it again." 3 months later, Charles had Adrian declared legally dead. He said it was time to move forward. "But a mother knows, Mr. Cole. I can feel it in my bones. Adrian is alive somewhere, and this family knows more than they're telling." Vincent spent the next 2 weeks digging through Adrian's past, interviewing old friends who spoke of a young man who had grown increasingly troubled in the months before his disappearance. They described someone who had started asking questions about his father's business. Someone who had stopped sleeping, who had filled notebooks with numbers and dates and names. One former roommate from college remembered Adrian saying something chilling just weeks before he vanished. "Some vaults don't hold money, they hold bodies." The Ashford family banking empire had been built over 4 generations, each one adding another floor to the tower of wealth and influence. Charles Ashford sat at the top of that tower, a man whose word could move markets and destroy careers. Vincent requested a meeting with him under the pretense of closing some final paperwork on Adrian's estate. Charles received him in an office that overlooked the city like a throne room overlooking a kingdom. He was in his 70s now, but still commanded the room with the presence of a man who had never been told no. "Mr. Cole," Charles said, not offering his hand. "I understood this matter was settled years ago. My son is dead. Dragging up the past serves no one." Vincent met his gaze without flinching. Your wife doesn't believe that. Charles's jaw tightened. My wife is overcome with grief. It's made her irrational. Adrian was troubled. He left. It happens in families, even wealthy ones, perhaps especially in wealthy ones. What did he find, Mr. Ashford? Vincent asked quietly. What was in those documents he brought to you that last morning? For just a moment, something flickered across Charles's face. Fear. Then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. I don't know what fantasy Evelyn has been feeding you, but this conversation is over. My lawyers will be in touch if you continue to harass my family. Vincent left the office knowing he had struck a nerve. Over the next few days, he was followed. Black cars with tinted windows appeared wherever he went. His apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken. Someone wanted him to know they were watching. Someone wanted him afraid. But fear had a way of confirming suspicions, and Vincent's suspicions were growing into certainties. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. The Ashford family accountant, a nervous man named Robert Chen, contacted Vincent through an encrypted email. They met in a parking garage at midnight, Robert's hands shaking as he handed over a USB drive. I don't know what's on this, Robert whispered, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. I found it hidden in Adrian's old desk when they cleaned out his office. I kept it all these years because something felt wrong about how quickly they wanted to erase him. But I'm retiring next month, leaving the country. I can't carry this secret anymore. Whatever Adrian found, it scared him to death, maybe literally. The drive contained financial records that made Vincent's blood run cold. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified documents that showed the Ashford Bank had been laundering money for criminal organizations for decades. But worse than that were the investment schemes. Predatory loans designed to destroy small businesses and families. Pension funds that had been gutted. Life savings that had disappeared into Ashford accounts. Thousands of lives ruined, and all of it hidden behind the respectable facade of one of America's oldest banking families. Adrian had discovered it all, and Adrian had wanted to expose it. Vincent sat in his apartment at 3 a.m, staring at the documents on his laptop screen, and felt the pieces finally click into place. Adrian hadn't run away. Adrian hadn't killed himself. Adrian had been silenced. But how? And more importantly, where? He thought about what the college roommate had said. Some vaults don't hold money. They hold bodies. The Ashford mansion had a vault, a legendary one, built by Charles's grandfather, designed to withstand anything from nuclear war to armed invasion. It was supposed to be empty now, the family fortune long since moved to digital accounts and secure facilities. But what if it wasn't empty? What if it had been holding something far more valuable than gold for the past 10 years? What if it had been holding the truth? Getting access to that vault would be impossible through normal means. The Ashford family would never allow it. But Evelyn had given Vincent a key to the mansion, trusting him to search for clues whenever the family was away. She had also, perhaps unknowingly, given him access to something else. Charles Ashford traveled to Switzerland twice a year for banking conferences. He would be leaving in 3 days. Vincent spent those 3 days preparing, studying the mansion's layout, learning everything he could about vault security systems from the 1950s. When the night finally came, he entered the mansion at 2 a.m, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The vault was in the basement, hidden behind a wall of wine racks in what appeared to be a cellar. Vincent moved the racks aside and found himself facing a steel door that looked like it belonged in a bank, not a home. The combination lock was old, but sophisticated. Vincent had brought tools, borrowed from a former safecracker he'd helped keep out of prison years ago. His hands were steady as he worked, listening to the tumblers click into place, feeling for the subtle variations in resistance that would tell him when he had found the right numbers. It took 45 minutes. When the final tumbler fell into place and the door swung open with a groan of metal that hadn't moved in years, Vincent wasn't prepared for what waited inside. The vault was large, roughly the size of a studio apartment. Gold bars were stacked along one wall. Paintings that belonged in museums leaned against another. But in the center of the room, sitting on a cot with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, was a man. He was thin, painfully so, with long hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in years. His eyes, sunken deep in their sockets, reflected the beam of Vincent's flashlight like an animal caught in headlights. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the man spoke, his voice rough from disuse but unmistakably educated, unmistakably refined. "You're not one of them," he said. It wasn't a question. Vincent's throat felt tight. Adrian Ashford. The man's laugh was bitter, broken. That's what they used to call me. Before I became a ghost. Before I became a secret too dangerous to let out but too valuable to kill. You found me. After all this time, someone finally found me. Vincent stepped into the vault, his mind reeling. "How long have you been here?" Adrian looked at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. 10 years, 3 months, 14 days. I stopped counting the hours after the first year. Makes you go mad counting hours in the dark. The horror of it settled over Vincent like a weight. Your father did this. It wasn't a question, but Adrian answered anyway. My father, my uncle, my cousin Richard, the whole family. I found out what they'd been doing, what the bank had been built on. Not just money laundering, though that was bad enough. They'd been running schemes that destroyed people, deliberately targeting vulnerable families, minorities, anyone they thought couldn't fight back. I found documents showing they'd foreclosed on a veteran's home the day before Christmas, drove him to suicide. They'd ruined a woman's business and she lost custody of her children. I found dozens of cases like that, hundreds. And when I confronted my father, told him I was going to the authorities, he just looked at me with these cold eyes and said, "You're too soft for this world, Adrian. You always have been." Adrian's voice cracked, and Vincent saw tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. He brought me down here, said it was to talk privately. Then he locked the door. For the first week, I screamed until my throat bled. I beat my fists against the door until my knuckles shattered. I thought it was temporary, that he was trying to scare me, that he'd let me out once I promised to stay quiet. But then he came back with food, with water, with a chemical toilet and a cot. He told me I'd stay here until I understood that family loyalty was more important than moral righteousness. That was his phrase, moral righteousness, as if not wanting to destroy innocent people was some kind of character flaw. Vincent felt sick. Why didn't he just kill you? Adrian's smile was ghastly. Because he loved me, in his twisted way, and because my death would have raised questions. This way, I simply disappeared. Troubled young man, probably ran off to Europe or killed himself somewhere remote. The family could control the narrative, and killing me would have made him a murderer. This way, he could tell himself he was just teaching me a lesson, just keeping me safe from my own naive idealism. "Who else knows you're here?" Vincent asked. Adrian's eyes grew dark. "My father comes once a week, sometimes my uncle. They bring food, supplies. They talk to me like I'm a child who's being punished. They tell me about the business, about family gatherings I'm missing, about how much easier life would be if I just accepted reality. My father tried to get me to sign papers saying I approved of the business practices, that I understood they were necessary. I refused. So here I stay." Vincent pulled out his phone, but Adrian's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't. Not yet. You don't understand what you're dealing with. My family has connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. If you call the authorities now, they'll bury this. They'll say I'm mentally unstable, that I imprisoned myself, that you're a conspiracy theorist trying to extort money. I've had 10 years to think about this. If I'm getting out, if I'm getting justice, we need to be smart." Vincent's mind raced. Adrian was right. The Ashford family's power and influence could crush a straightforward approach. They needed leverage, evidence, something that couldn't be dismissed or buried. "The documents you found," Vincent said. "Do you remember enough to recreate them?" Adrian's eyes lit up with something Vincent recognized as hope mixed with hunger. "I remember every single one. I've spent 10 years in this vault doing nothing but remembering. Every name, every date, every account number. I've written them on the walls when they give me paper. I write them down again. I've carved some into the floorboards with a piece of metal I pried from the cot. This vault has become my memory palace, and every brick holds a crime. Vincent looked around and realized Adrian was right. The walls were covered in tiny, precise handwriting. Numbers and names and dates covered every available surface. It was the work of someone who had nothing but time and everything to lose. "There's something else," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "In the back corner behind those paintings, there's a safe within the vault. My father doesn't know I found it. My grandfather built it, kept his own secrets there. I managed to open it 3 years ago. Inside are the original documents, the real proof of what this family has done going back 70 years. My grandfather kept insurance, evidence against his own crimes in case he ever needed leverage. He was a monster, but he was a careful monster." Vincent helped Adrian move the paintings aside. The safe was small, old-fashioned, and opened easily once Adrian showed him the combination he'd memorized. Inside were folders, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved in the climate-controlled vault. Vincent pulled them out carefully, his hands shaking as he realized what he was holding. This wasn't just evidence of financial crimes. This was a roadmap to corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and business. "We need to get you out of here," Vincent said. "Tonight, now." But Adrian shook his head. "If I leave now, they'll know someone helped me. They'll destroy everything, use their connections to make it all disappear. We need to do this right. You need to get that evidence somewhere safe first. Copies to journalists, lawyers, people outside the Ashford sphere of influence. Then you come back for me with the authorities, with cameras, with witnesses. We expose them all at once, so completely that they can't spin the story or make it go away." Vincent wanted to argue, wanted to get this broken man out of his prison immediately, but he recognized the cold logic in Adrian's words. "How much longer can you survive here?" he asked. Adrian's laugh was hollow. "I've survived 10 years. I can survive a few more days. Besides, I want to see their faces when the door opens and they realize I've beaten them. I want my father to understand that he created his own destruction the day he locked me in here." They spent the next 2 hours planning, Adrian explaining every detail of the family's operations, giving Vincent names of people who might help, warning him about those who were compromised. When Vincent finally left, climbing back out of the vault and carefully replacing the wine racks, he carried a backpack full of documents that could bring down an empire. He also carried the weight of leaving a man behind in that underground prison, even temporarily. The next 3 days were a blur. Vincent made copies of everything, sent encrypted files to investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit through a friend who owed him a favor, and hired a lawyer specializing in whistleblower cases. He moved the original documents to a secure location and recorded a video statement explaining everything he'd found, including Adrian's location. He set up a dead man switch, ensuring that if anything happened to him, the evidence would be released automatically. On the 4th night, Vincent returned to the Ashford mansion with FBI agents, police officers, and 2 television news crews. Evelyn Ashford met them at the door, her face pale but determined. She had known something was coming. Vincent had warned her to prepare herself for the truth, but nothing could really prepare a person for this. Charles Ashford arrived home 30 minutes later, his car pulling into the circular driveway to find his estate surrounded by law enforcement. The look on his face when he saw Vincent standing on his front steps would stay with the detective forever. It was the look of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "Where is he?" Vincent asked quietly. "Where's your son?" Charles said nothing, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking toward the house involuntarily. The agents followed Vincent to the basement, to the wine cellar, to the vault. Vincent worked the combination again, his fingers steady despite the cameras recording every moment. When the door swung open this time, Adrian was standing, waiting, He had used the past few days to make himself as presentable as possible with the limited resources he had. His eyes met his father's over the shoulders of the police officers, and in that moment, Vincent saw something pass between them. Not love, not anymore, but recognition, an acknowledgement that this was the end. "Hello, Father," Adrian said, his voice stronger than it had been days ago. "Did you really think a locked door could hold the truth forever?" Charles Ashford aged a decade in that moment. His shoulders slumped, his face crumbled. "I was protecting you," he whispered. "Protecting the family." Adrian stepped out of the vault for the first time in 10 years, and Vincent saw him waver as his legs adjusted to the idea of freedom. "You were protecting your crimes. There's a difference." The arrest happened quickly after that. Charles Ashford, his brother, his nephew, all taken into custody as the evidence Vincent had gathered was presented. The documents from the vault, Adrian's testimony, the investigation that followed. It all built into a case that couldn't be denied or dismissed. The Ashford banking empire collapsed within weeks, its assets seized, its accounts frozen, its reputation destroyed. The trials would take years, but the outcome was never in doubt. Adrian Ashford stood in the garden of the estate 6 months later, the mansion behind him being prepared for auction. He had gained weight, his hair was cut, his beard shaved. He looked almost like the photographs of the young man who had disappeared 10 years ago. But his eyes were different. They held a hardness that came from surviving the unsurvivable, from spending a decade in darkness and emerging with the truth. Vincent joined him, handing him a newspaper with the headline about his father's sentencing. 40 years in federal prison. His uncle and cousin had received similar sentences. The family's victims were finally getting restitution, though no amount of money could repair the damage that had been done. "How do you feel?" Vincent asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at the gardens he'd once played in as a child, before everything had gone wrong. "Free," he said finally. "Vindicated, but also hollow. I spent 10 years dreaming of this moment, and now that it's here, I realize that justice doesn't erase the past, doesn't give me back the decade I lost. My father destroyed my life trying to hide his crimes. He destroyed his own life in the process. Everyone lost." Vincent nodded, understanding that some wounds were too deep to fully heal. "What will you do now?" Adrian smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "I'm starting a foundation, using what's left of the Ashford fortune after restitution to help people like the ones my family destroyed. Financial counseling, legal aid, housing assistance. I can't undo the past, but maybe I can build something good from the ashes. Turn the family name into something other than a symbol of greed and cruelty." He turned to Vincent, extending his hand. "Thank you. For not giving up, for believing my stepmother when everyone else thought she was crazy, for opening that vault." Vincent shook his hand, feeling the strength in Adrian's grip despite everything he'd endured. "Your stepmother never stopped believing you were alive. That kind of love doesn't give up." Adrian's eyes filled with tears. "I know, she's the only family I have left now, the only one who deserves the name." As Vincent walked away from the Ashford estate for the last time, he thought about vaults and the things people hide in them, gold and documents, secrets and lies. But sometimes, if you were lucky enough to find the right combination, you could also find the truth buried beneath all that weight. And sometimes, just sometimes, the truth was enough to set someone free. Adrian Ashford had spent 10 years in darkness, buried alive by his own family's greed and fear. But he had survived. He had remembered every crime, every victim, every detail. He had turned his prison into a testament, his suffering into evidence. And in the end, he had brought down an empire built on the broken backs of innocent people. Vincent had solved many cold cases in his career, but this one would stay with him forever. Not because of the dramatic rescue or the powerful family brought to justice, but because of what it taught him about human resilience, about the strength it takes to survive in darkness and emerge still believing in light, about the price of silence and the power of truth. The Ashford vault was emptied now, its gold distributed to victims, its documents entered as evidence in dozens of trials. But Vincent knew there were other vaults out there, in other mansions, holding other secrets. Other families hiding their sins behind locked doors and generational wealth. Other truths waiting to be discovered by someone brave enough to seek them out. He had opened one vault and found a man who refused to be forgotten, who turned his imprisonment into preparation for the justice he knew would eventually come. How many others were out there, waiting for someone to find the right combination? How many secrets were locked away, guarded by power and money and the assumption that some doors would never be opened? Vincent didn't know. But he knew he would keep looking, keep searching, keep opening doors that people swore should stay closed. Because some vaults hold more than gold. Some hold the truth. And the truth, no matter how long it's been buried, always finds a way to break free. What secrets do you think powerful families are hiding behind closed doors? Would you have opened that vault, knowing it could destroy lives, or would you have walked away? Drop your thoughts below. Subscribe and hit that like button for more stories of hidden crimes, family betrayals, and investigations that expose what the wealthy and powerful try to bury. Until the next case.